Oh well, already making up for lost time. All right, welcome everyone to our talk, Dialing into the Past, RCE via fax machine, because why not? This took way more work than we expected, so I hope you're all looking forward to the ride. My name is Rick de Jager. I'm joined by my colleague Carla Meijer, here on a picture from the 80s. And before we get too far into the talk, we wanted to start with an acknowledgement. A lot of this work is inspired by a previous CCC talk about hacking fax machines by Eyal Itkin and Janif Balmas. They did great work, and this just really put the idea into our mind, like, oh, if we ever find a bug that we can reach via fax, we should see how difficult it can be, and it will be fun. So, since novelty is not necessarily the motivation why we're looking at a fax machine, the main reason for this is that this beautiful fax machine is actually a Pwn2Own target, and it has been for the last 4 years. We've been competing in Pwn2Own now for 3 of those years. Pwn2Own is a zero-day competition where essentially this company makes a list of targets, and 3 months in advance you'll get this list, and then competitors have to look at all these targets and find new novel zero-day vulnerabilities to get code execution on them. There are a couple different flavors of the Pwn2Own competition. There is the desktop software one, which is mostly browsers, virtual machines. There's automotive, which is car hacking, for example. And then there is the IoT one, which is the one we competed in, which is consumer electronics mostly. Now, the reasoning for looking at printers is we kind of decided on this project when we saw this on the CDI blog. Essentially, when you hack a router and then you pivot into a secondary device, like a printer, for example, they are worth 100K. Well, we thought 100K, that's quite nice, let's go for that. But there's more to the prize money. It's not just a flat 100K. In Pwn2Own, there's actually a serious reduction on your prize money if you have the same bug as someone else, and printers have a huge attack surface, so you're less likely to dupe on the bug with another contestant. We can choose a harder target here, like a memory corruption bug, in order to also, again, lower our chances. There are a lot of people that can do a simple command injection bug, but if we do memory corruption, it's both more specific and it requires more work, so someone else might not dupe on that as easily. And then our strategy for picking a target, because we had multiple printers to pick from, is we picked one that was still relatively cheap, but also had encrypted firmware. So there's quite this barrier of entry. So you first need to buy a device, and then take it apart, and then extract the firmware. And we were hoping that other people would pick a target that was easier, and therefore not dupe with us. So meet our protagonist. This is the Lexmark 331 series. It has been a Pwn2Own target since 2021. We started doing Pwn2Own in 2022, and we've written an exploit for this 3 times over. It's based on Yocto Linux. It's actually quite a beefy operating system. It runs some Rust components, some Qt apps. It's quite nice. And compared to the other printers, I would say Lexmark has done a decent job at making it secure. There's multiple users on the system. Everything is fairly up to date. There's some attempts at sandboxing with systemd components as well. So overall, they do quite well. We've still hacked it 3 times, so it's not perfect. And most importantly for today, this thing has fax support, which we didn't select it on, but it just happens to, we happened to find out. So, aside from the money, why would we do this? Well, faxes really had their heyday, I want to say, up until '99. And, well, I'm a 25-year-old, so I kind of feel like I missed out on all this faxing. Before this project, I'd never sent a fax. By this point, it's going to be hundreds, probably.
Yeah.
So how would you actually go about this?
All right. So the first thing we need, obviously, is a firmware image. Otherwise, this would be a complete shot in the dark. After that, we need some debugging capability, because otherwise, if you want to exploit a memory corruption bug, you need some insights in the program's internal state and whatnot. So the plan is to have like a nice debugging capability, either through like code execution or perhaps a JTAG debugger, and then use these capabilities to find a vulnerability, exploit it, collect the cache at Pwn2Own, Yeah, that's what I just said. And port the vulnerability over to fax and give a nice CCC talk. So here we are. All right, so let's put our minds toward getting a firmware image. If you want to get a firmware image, the first place to look is obviously Lexmark's website. So you can just go ahead and download a firmware image. And when you put that through binwalk, gibberish comes out. So you're like, okay, what's going on here? Turns out entropy is pretty high. I would say insanely high. And so this is a clear indicator that this is encrypted, unfortunately. So yeah, at this point, it's quite clear that it's useless to look at this image because it's encrypted. We don't have any keys, so you have to get back to the drawing board. Also, fun fact: a firmware update for a printer is actually printed. So it's like embedded in a PostScript document. And you just print it to the printer, and then the printer will start updating its firmware. Anyway, so the next step was to actually get this device. So this is the photo of the printer in the back of my car. So yeah, we bought this thing off a second-hand market, and that went a little bit like this. I had a little conversation with the seller, and the seller was so kind to inform me that, hey, are you sure you want to buy this printer? And I was like, yeah, why would I not? And well, the toners are running low, so if you want to print, they're really expensive and they're running out soon. So yeah, you probably want to look elsewhere. Like printing, why would I do that? All right, so with the printer on our hands, with our new toy at our disposal, we peeked around at the PCB and we spotted it has markings for JTAG, which is awesome, which makes our lives really easy. So all I have to do now is, if you're unfamiliar, JTAG is this interface over which you can just peek into its memory, you can set breakpoints, you can modify register values, you can do basically, it's an exploit developer's dream. So that would be the golden standard. So our life was going to be very easy, and so we just, oh yeah. There we go again. So that's what we did. We hooked it up to our Raspberry Pi. Our Raspberry Pi has GPIO ports. You can use OpenOCD to talk JTAG to a target. It has out-of-the-box support for that, so that all worked beautifully. We could send out an ID code request. It responds back to ARM limited, so yeah, we know we're good. There's no problem in the signal whatsoever. So we're not crazy. And then after a day of tinkering, we figured that it doesn't respond to anything else. Nothing interesting is going on here. So they probably switched off something in some non-volatile setting. So it was back to the drawing board for us. So next thing on our tier list for getting a firmware is to just solder off the actual storage of the board. This is pretty straightforward. You just take it to a hot soldering station, desolder the chip, and now it turned, just put in a universal EEPROM reader. We used the bproc2c for this. This was back a few years when I was still a student, when I was playing with this thing. I still have it around. And it turns out that this reader really likes its own proprietary adapters for TSOP48 chips. And of course we have a cheap knockoff one of eBay, which it doesn't like. So there's nothing a software patch can fix. But I would not recommend going this route. But take something that's take a device that has less extortionary tensions. Luckily, in the end, we got it to work, and we got our firmware dump. So that's nice. It turns out that they use UBI, and UBI is not that exciting. It's a block management stuff, so you can manage bad blocks, wear leveling, all that stuff is done in software. It's a framework that's written specifically for Linux, as far as I know. It contains a squashfs file system, which you could just extract. So there's the extraction successful, and then you get left with a nice root file system with all the binaries and all the stuff that's on there. So at this point, we have our firmware image. It's decrypted. But suppose that Lexmark releases a firmware update, that would be bad. We have to go through all of this again. So we also found like the firmware decryption keys, and we made our own decryptor. And so next time Lexmark releases a firmware update, we could just download and decrypt it, and we're good. Okay, so what happened to the printer, you might ask? Because this, the chip is desoldered. Well, obviously, I soldered it back. And this might surprise you, but it actually works. All right, so now that we have a firmware image, next thing is on our list of nice things to have is a debug capability. So it turns out that the device has secure boot, so we can't just go around and mess with the storage chip and modify it and backdoor it. Also, Lexmark doesn't like its end consumers to just SSH into the device and play with its internals. So what we need is an exploit. And it turns out that NCC Group already found one the year before, and they submitted it to Pwn2Own and wrote a nice blog post about it. But there were some crucial stuff left out. But we were able to fill in the blanks with our firmware image that we just got. So with this, we got ourselves a root shell. So yeah, we thought it was pretty good. So now we can think around in the firmware. We can debug processes by uploading DDB server, for example. Yeah, this is pretty good. So of course, the NCC Group bug was patched in the latest firmware. So we weren't running the latest firmware. As soon as you update it, then the bug's gone, and then you have to start from square one again. So but in the meantime, we could use this capability to actually find vulnerabilities, which were hopefully still there in the next release. Okay. Now that we got ourselves a debug capability, it's time to start hunting for the actual vulnerability that we want to submit to Pwn2Own. The first thing you do when you're in a situation like this is you map out the entire attack surface. Now, as you can see from the slide, it's quite huge. So there's different protocols over which you can communicate. There's dozens and dozens of scripts and binaries that you can invoke directly. Impressive number of supported file formats. This is not even the exhaustive list, by the way. Because like PDF also allows you to embed all sorts of fancy image and file formats and even fonts. So in the end, we opted for the JBIG2 decompressor, which is reachable over PDF, so you can actually get your input processed by that code over PDF, but also over fax. So reference here. These are the case studies that we know. These are the cases that we know of for the last 3 years that other teams, well, not just other teams, that the teams in general, including us, have attacked. So you can see there's clustering going on. There's some guys who look into like the web stuff, the CGI scripts. There's people interested in PostScript who have a good time there. We went for the JPX decode. That's JPEG 2000. We've heard that they're removing the entire component this year because they were pwned through JPEG 2000 3 times in a row now. Okay.
All right, so attack surface out of the way. Let's move on to a bit of a recap. Because we've pwned this device now 3 years in a row, we wanted to give a bit of an overview. So the first year, we did all of the legwork of dumping the firmware, getting a decryptor out, getting persistence on the printer so we could survive an update actually and still have code execution. But in the first year, we used the printer bug as part of this chain of hacking a router first and then hacking a printer. And sadly, our router bug got kind of squashed in an update where the bug was still there, but the update modified the code so much that our exploit was no longer stable, and it sadly failed on stage. But we still learned a lot from just hacking this printer. We put a lot of hours into it, and this work was not lost. So the next year we come back, we knew JPEG 2000 is this really weak component, and if we just turn on AFL for another 5 minutes, we will have a new bug. So great, we have a bug. We're already all set for Pwn2Own. I'm filling out the case file, and then a few hours before the deadline for submitting for Pwn2Own, we noticed that a new update is dropped. So in a panic, I install this update, and then we realize, oh, this update contains entirely new crypto. The old decryptors will not work, and worst of all, we cannot roll this update back. So we're stuck. We just bluffed in the sign-up form. Yeah, sure, we have an exploit. Our exploit still worked, but the offsets were all different because it was memory corruption. So essentially, we had 2-3 days to fix this problem. And I realized quite quickly, we're not going to break this crypto in 3 days. So instead, what I did is I contacted Blasty because I knew he owned this printer at Pwn2Own a previous year. He's not owning it this year. And, well, he might help us. Worst case, he says no, right? So I reach out to say, hey, our exploit broke. With just a couple hours to go for Pwn2Own. Can you help us out? Blasty, being the helpful guy he is, says, yeah, sure, what do you need? So I say, well, I have this persistence, this backdoor I can give to you. If you just install that, update your printer, it might break, in which case we'll buy a new printer for you. But it also might just give you a shell on the latest firmware. And if that works, then can you just give us an export of /user bin, and then, because we didn't want to tell him what binary we were pwning yet. So just give us every single binary on the system, and we'll figure it out. And, well, Blasty's like, okay, you're asking quite a lot here, like what's in it for me? And my reply was basically like, well, the persistence is going to be useful for you next year as well. You'll get our endless gratitude, and we'll buy you free drinks at Pwn2Own. We did kind of scam Blasty after he said, yeah, sounds good, because Pwn2Own has an open bar. So we did, in fact, not buy Blasty many drinks. So to continue the timeline, Blasty saved our ass, our exploit worked, we got 20K for it. And next year, Blasty apparently didn't hold a grudge against us and joined our team for Pwn2Own. Blasty gets mad at the new crypto and breaks it just for fun. And at Pwn2Own this year, we dropped 2 more exploits, one of which is the exploit that we're sending over fax now. All right, so as we said, the exploit contains or pertains to JBig2. JBig2 is reachable over both fax and PDF. It's historically meant for fax. Lexmark wrote their own library for this, so then you know it's going to be a free bugs, essentially. So the plan is to just write an exploit for this, put it in a PDF. That was easy enough, took about a week. Get some cache from Pwn2Own, and then just port it to fax, because how hard can that be? The actual bug I cannot really talk about, because they still have a few weeks left to roll updates for it. But I do want to quickly talk about heap shaping with JBig2. JBig2 kind of has this, this aura about it of being this really complex format, which in a way it is. It was used in an exploit by an NSO group, and they had to do all kinds of crazy CPU building. But because our mitigations are not so strong, we don't have to do much of that. JBig2 is actually a really nice format for heap shaping. It's not as good as PostScript, you don't get a full interpreter, but you do get elastic size allocations, you get very fine control over the lifetime of objects, so you can kind of allocate them free at will. And you can even, if you need to spray a lot of data, there is another compression format in your compression format. I'm sure it makes sense. So you can even compress all your sprayed data, then deliver it in a JBig compressed stream, and it's going to decompress on the target, so you don't have to send a lot of data. We didn't use this, but it could help you if you need a very big heap spray. What we used was mostly extensions. Extensions are like a vendor-specific segment that you can use to implement whatever non-standard thing you want in your JBig stream. Lexmark doesn't do anything non-standard. They only implement a comment, which is a very common way to just put some debug data in your JBig stream. These are very nice because they're a very clean, controlled allocation. Essentially, if you say, like, oh, I have a comment with this data in it, that data is just going to be on the heap, and there's not much you have to do to get it there. It's very easy to implement as well. It's literally just one for one, so you don't have to do any raster operations or any weird math or compression. So it's really nice to work with. This is what the structures look like in Lexmark's library. Essentially, they have a type, a pointer to some data, and a size field. And then every single segment, so not just comments, but like if you want to draw a bitmap or something similar, every segment is going to have a header like this. And most importantly for us, they contain a bunch of pointers. So if you're doing memory corruption, this is a really nice way to go about it. Then this is what our library essentially looked like. It is a lot more complicated when you actually implement the exploit, but that's for a later date. For now, for example, a comment, we just wrote a little library function to say, I want a comment with this ID. The parser sees this as just a comment with ID lead and this data. And this data is then just in memory. So your allocation, you don't control the first 16 bytes fully. So that's the ID, a size, a type field, and something else. But then you just get your data, and this data can be as large as you want. There's no real limit there. Okay, so if you put all of that together, you're going into a PDF, you're going to get an exploit that looks a bit like this.
Gaat gewoon werken de eerste keer.
Ja hoor.
Snap je?
For the non-Dutch speakers in the audience, the sentence at the beginning was me claiming, yeah, this is going to work fine the first time around. And I mean, it did. This was our outcome at Pwn2Own this year. We ended up in third place, making 95K in total. That's not just the Lexmark bug. The Lexmark bug is part of that. So we were quite happy with this. So now that we got all of this out of the way, there is some fax plumbing that we still need to do.
Yeah. Right. So the first prerequisite that you think of when you're exploiting fax is you need an analog phone line. Now, raise your hand if you own one. Yeah, neither do we. Right. Okay, so I'm happy for the very few, but we aren't proud possessors of one. So how would we go about developing a fax exploit when you don't have an analog phone line? So what will you do? Well, you just run out in panic and try to do random stuff, and then you end up in the second-hand shop and you see this thing laying around. This is an ISP modem. I happen to be a customer. I happened to play around with this thing a couple of years back, so I know my way. So this thing has analog phone jacks on the back. Of course, it's useless because I don't have a subscription for analog phones. So yeah, why would you buy this thing unless you're going to convince it in some way to use those phone jacks? So there's a really amazing blog post by a guy named Dan Mann. Raise your hand if you're here. And he uses, he figured out where the traces are on the board. The device uses eMMC to talk to its storage chips. He figured out what the pinout is, and soldered some wires to it, and designed this nice PCB in the shape of a micro SD card. Soldered wires to this thing, wired it all up, and then you have this thing coming out of your modem. And you can put this in an SD card reader, and you can just fucking mount it. So yeah, that was an amazing achievement. All the credits go to him, by the way. So back in 2019, I was a little bit involved with this project. So I sent him a tool that could decrypt the certificates of this device. It's totally out of context for this talk. But yeah, in exchange, he sent me those nice SD card shaped PCBs. So I still have them. So I could basically solder this thing in and wire it up and mount the root file system in one afternoon. So then this thing doesn't have secure boot, so you just plant a backdoor in there and you have a root shell on the modem. So that's cool. So getting this modem then to actually use its analog phone ports without having it connected, hooked up to the ISP, that takes a lot of convincing. So I really don't recommend you do this, especially in retrospect. You could just go ahead and buy a SIP gateway for like $100. So yeah, I did it my way. In the end, the thing still works. So this is our setup. On top you have like a Raspberry Pi. It's running Asterisk. It's in charge of the whole thing. And then you have the modem, which talks to Asterisk over Ethernet. And the phone line on the left is our laptop connected with an 56K modem. And on the right is our fax machine. You can just dial 101, because that's the number I chose to dial into the fax machine, and you can just hear the dial tone and the fax tone. So with this, we managed to send, well, my friend Rick here managed to send his baby's first fax. So this looks a little bit like this. Very proud to say. Okay. Today we had great success. Okay, so with that, we can send faxes. So let's have a look at this marvel of technology that we have on our hands. So here's an overview from Wikipedia. Especially note the thousands of bits per second that you can send. So this is what we can do now.
Great, so we have all the plumbing in place, we have an exploit, we can send faxes. What more would you want, right? We can just send this exploit. Well, here you can see our Pwn2Own exploit. It was 3.5 megabytes. And fax speeds are not great for the amount of heap spray I did. Sending this exploit over low speeds because of some other bugs, but sending it over low speed would take us about 2 hours. I don't think the demo would fit, right? So clearly we need to do something else. So we ended up rewriting the entire exploit from scratch, actually thinking about how the heap shaping works instead of just filling up every single bin on the system. And we got it down to about 9,000 bytes, which 10 seconds to send roughly, which seemed acceptable to me. The next problem becomes that Lexmark's way of implementing JPEG2 is not following the standards. They're actually using a non-standard facility, which is a way for fax manufacturers to say, hey, I am this model of fax and I support this custom encoding. And then if another fax from the same company sends a fax to the other fax, they can use this special encoding. There's no one that supports this except for another fax, and we didn't feel like buying a second fax to throw the exploit from. So instead I wrote a fax client. I recommend this to no one. I mean, that's kind of a lie. I patched efax, which is this command line Linux utilities to send faxes. I think it was written in 1999. Good year, by the way. So we needed to add support to send raw data. By default, it's going to only support run length encoded data, which is what you want if you're sending an actual fax, but we're sending an exploit, so we need a bit more control. We also need to set the non-standard facility to tell the fax, hey, actually, I'm also a Lexmark fax, and I support JPEG. Then after that, we should have implemented error correction mode, because the spec says that you have to do it, and if you don't, you run into a lot of issues. But we chose to run into those issues instead, and it worked. This does bring along another problem, which I like to call high-stakes faxing. When you receive a fax, it's going to save it to disk. So in case your ink runs out, the power cuts out, or you run out of paper, your toddler turns off your fax machine, you still have this fax, right? Great. There's not a problem here, though. If any invalid JPEG stream is received, doesn't have to be an exploit, doesn't have to segfault, it just needs to be invalid, it crashes the fax service. And then the printer realizes, oh, something crashed. I must reboot now. Before it has a chance to wipe the fax. So the first time we managed to actually hit the parser over fax, I was quite happy because I was working remote. Carlo was not happy because the printer was now rebooting in a loop. I imagine it looked something like this. Open the fax queue, parse JPEG, reboot, open the fax queue again. It sends it down a very dark path that I would not wish upon my worst enemy. All right, so we have a working exploit over fax. Great. Now let's see what could we actually do with it if we wanted to do harm, right? So we have to look at who actually still uses fax. That's going to be mostly sectors that really need some kind of legally binding or otherwise important way of signing documents. So for example, healthcare uses it still for prescription, patient records, etc. We found that 90% of medical offices, according to some polls, still use fax in some way, shape or form. Real estate will sometimes still use it. So if you sign a lease agreement, they might want an actual signature, but not the cryptographic kind that can go over fax. And then government and legal might also still use it, mostly for the same reason, right? Because telephone lines are sometimes might have special legal protection. For those reasons, fax is still used. And then finally, the banking sector also still uses fax sometimes. Although I heard that Deutsche Bank was going to retire their fax sometime next year. So we have a couple of months to run this exploit. From an attacker POV, there's actually quite a lot of pros. The attack surface is still fairly high because it's still a document parser. But you don't have to deal with all the firewalls or nits, because who is firewalling their fax machine? Your targets are kind of self-selecting, because if someone wants to receive documents via fax, it's only going to be important documents, right? So if you're going to sniff documents from a fax machine, you're getting the good stuff, essentially. And then there's also another way to monetize this, which is that if you pwn a fax, the fax is going to have a telephone number that you can use to call paid telephone numbers. So if you think of it like a very low-tech crypto miner, right? You hack a bunch of faxes and you call paid numbers. There's of course some cons as well. For one, you have to develop an exploit for fax, which I would not recommend. The landscape is also a bit more fragmented, and it might be harder to tell what kind of fax you have. So even for our exploit, we can tell that it's a Lexmark fax before we send the exploit, because we have to negotiate this non-standard extension. But even then, we don't know which version of the firmware it is, because these people are running fax, they might not update their fax. And for this exploit, if we get the wrong offset and it crashes, it boot loops the fax. There's one more pro I forgot to mention, is that if you hack a fax, you can still, if this fax is connected to the network, which, I mean, most likely it is if it's also used as a normal printer, you can use it to pivot into the network. All right, with that, it's become time for the demo.
Yeah.
Will you run it?
All right.
We'll start out with the shell on the laptop, and then I'll swap it over to this camera. I've had to listen to this hundreds of times, so I figured you could have one as well. Do you want to do the honors?
Yeah, sure.
So in a few seconds, it's going to actually process the job. Those are separate threads, so it's already confirmed that it received the fax. It will spin up, which you may or may not be able to hear.
Should be any moment now.
This is very reliable technology.
There we go. So, but we're not done yet. So there's, as you might have seen, there's a phone here. And what would happen if we dial into the fax? So 101. Obviously, you need a way to play this, right? So what if we try dial tones? All right, let me hang up. All right. Okay, with that, I would like to thank you for attending.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Awesome presentation and awesome demo. Nick and Carlo. We have a few minutes, well, very fast minutes for 1 or 2 questions. If you have questions, please line up on the microphones. If you want to leave the room, please do so fast. We have a strict time schedule, you know, our far plan. Yeah, well, that's it. Questions?
And in the meantime, one more thing. We'll have this fax set up at the organizers' assembly in the CTF hall, probably again in an hour or so. So if you want to come by and play Doom, you're more than welcome to.
So let me ask you maybe a stupid question. So now we saw yesterday, I think, that the electronic patient file is like foobar. And we know that this kind of data transfer doesn't work. So obviously, we also know that fax doesn't work. Fax is also foobar for transferring health data. What would be your recommendation for our German healthcare minister?
Well, it's always going to be difficult, right? Fax, in my opinion, has this special, this special legal status that it really doesn't deserve. You should move on to a more modern standard for these kind of things that you can actually secure. I don't know too much about the digital health system that you mentioned, but fax, I've been playing with it for over the last couple months, and this is not the way.
It isn't. Thanks.
So, we have one question at number 2. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Thank you. Well, a little bird on the street told me that at some ungodly hour you were still at the printer yesterday. So we were wondering, how many hours did you sleep this night, Carlo?
Surprisingly many.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Then I think I lost the bet, but thank you.
Number 1 has a question.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the very interesting presentation. You have said previously that you needed an analog line. Does that mean that voice over IP fax would not be susceptible to this attack?
No, it would be susceptible. So any way that you can hit this parser is susceptible. We did it over PDF. It would work over VoIP as well. We just wanted to do it analog because it seemed cool.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the interwebs? Okay, then it's time to close this one. It was really a pleasure. Have a nice day. Have nice days here for Congress. And thank you. See you and goodbye.
Thanks.